order. Bob McMenamin is a homegrown lawyer educated at the University of Portland and at Lewis and Clark's Northwestern College of Law. He's a volunteer par excellence, contributing to the community for over 3.5 decades in innumerable ways, from the Friends of the Library to the Multnomah County Victims Witness Commission to the Kidney Association of Oregon. He was named Alumnus of the Year by University of Portland in 1984. He's the former president of City Club, and I know he's a sucker for punishment because he's currently chairing our research study committee on gambling in Oregon. He's active in national, state, and local bar associations. He's a prolific writer, and he's an expert on clerical law. But more importantly to our discussion today, he is the author of the 1995 guidebook entitled Volunteers and the Law. Jill Nichols is the executive director of the Oregon Trail chapter of the American Red Cross, as I mentioned. She is, in that capacity, the coordinator for the statewide delivery of services for the Red Cross, and she has a long history with that organization, beginning in May of 1982. She did her undergraduate work at Portland State and received her master's in public administration from Portland State in 1984. Her volunteer activities include the National Disaster Services Advisory Committee and the Loma Prieta Earthquake Evaluation Team of the American Red Cross. She's also served as a board member for the American Society for Public Administration. She's also worked on the executive committee for Multnomah County Community Health Council and as a director for the Volunteer Bureau of Greater Portland. She's managed multi-million-dollar budgets, supervised the construction of facilities, worked on blood services logistics, and also motivating other volunteers within that organization. John Emrick is also one of our own. Born and educated in Portland, he graduated from the University of Portland in marketing in 1964. He began his career and spent his entire career with Norm Thompson, beginning in 1965 as a management trainee, ascending to the presidency in 1971, and then a decade later, in 1981, becoming a major shareholder. He served on the board of computer companies and also as a partner in a development company. His advisory committees include Capital Consultants, Hannah Anderson, and Graphic Arts Center. His nonprofit interests, although varied, focus on education, youth at risk, the environment, and human rights issues. He's unofficially helped in fundraising in a number of capacities and also served on the boards of University of Portland, Pacific Coast Outward Bound, St. Mary's Academy, and House of Emoja. He recently received an honorary degree from his alma mater, University of Portland, as a Doctor of Public Service. So what better panel than these three premier volunteers in our community to know about our premier issue, that of rebuilding a sense of community. And I will begin with Bob and ask you all to tell us, please, in your opinion, what are we turning more inward than outward these days? And in terms of social capitalism, is this a bull or a bear market?
Yeah. She cheated a little bit. She did not tell us that she was going to ask us anything like that. And we start out right out on our handicap. However, I'm very pleased that she did not use an opening line that one of my friends got a week or two ago, that he was a model speaker. He felt pretty good about that until he looked it up in the dictionary and found out that that was a small replica of the real thing. Talking about volunteers, I'd like people to raise their hand. How many people in this audience have been a volunteer at one time or another? I guess we better reverse this. How many have not been a volunteer? Now, okay, it's a unanimous house. Everybody in the house has been a volunteer. Well, what is a volunteer? You know, you've been there. What do you know about it? Did you get in trouble, or how did things go? I want to start out by saying volunteers are God's gift to society. They're absolutely essential, and as we go along, they are even more essential. As Big Brother, the government cuts back. If you don't have the volunteers, your agencies, private agencies, cannot handle things, and you're in real bad shape. Now, volunteers, you, are people who want to make the world a better place. You serve without pay, and you donate time, skill, knowledge, money. Sometimes you donate all four of those. What do you get out of it? Well, you know, it's not that bad. You get something out of it. You get social companionship. You meet some interesting people. You get the self-satisfaction of getting a job done. You get a good name, and you recall your days from studying Bill Shakespeare, and Bill Shakespeare said, "He who steals my purse steals trash, but he who steals my good name steals my most valuable possession." So you have that. You can get some job skills out of it, and you can even get it on your resume. And some surveys of the Fortune 500 companies have shown that whether or not you have been a volunteer and what you've done is an integral part of your resume that they're going to study as far as advancement or whether you get a job or not. Having somebody give you a recommendation is not all bad. You may remember the story of the elderly nun who got to the point where she couldn't eat food. So they called in the doctor, and the doctor said, well, he said, give her a glass of milk 3 times a day, and in the milk put 5 teaspoons full of brandy. So they did that, and she lived for another 8 years. So finally she was on her deathbed, and the sisters gathered around to see how she was doing and get her last words. And so her last words were, "Sisters, don't get rid of that cow." There can be problems, however, with volunteers. You read in the paper not too long ago that in Albany, Oregon, there was a verdict against the Boy Scouts in the amount of $4 million. Not too long after that, you read in the newspapers for Multnomah County, Sea Scouts, that there was a verdict against 2 volunteers for $7 million. Now, luckily, the Boy Scouts, Sea Scouts backed up their people all the way, and again, luckily, there was $15 million worth of insurance coverage, so things were a little better. What has happened, and why are people a little bit afraid? And I'm the bipolar speaker here. I give you, good stuff and bad stuff. The other speakers are all, they're really enjoying, and they love to be a volunteer, and they tell you how to do it, and they go at it. But it's my job to kind of, I'd like you to be educated, and when you make your choices, do it with some knowledge of what you're doing. The system has changed a bit, because when I went to law school, you could not sue a nonprofit organization. You could not sue a church or a charity. Of course, you could sue the volunteer, that person, if they did something wrong, but normally it was not worthwhile because they didn't have any money or you didn't want to do it. And there was usually no insurance involved. Well, in 1963, Oregon changed its law, and over the years, every state in the union has changed its laws so that you now can sue or go after or make a claim against a charity, a nonprofit. And, of course, all the nonprofits now have insurance. So all of a sudden, lawyers looking at it say, well, now there is a pot at the end of the rainbow. So we will take a look at what is there, and we may make a claim. And there have been some just extremely stupid moves on the part of some of the people involved in churches and charities. And I will not mention any names. And nobody in this room knows me, and I don't know them. But you take the national head of UGN. You remember there was a little problem of his sending a jet with his girlfriend over to Paris. And Jerry Frank wrote an article in the paper shortly thereafter, and he said, I wonder what was the responsibility of the directors of that organization when their CEO was spending, what they say finally, around $4.5 million or something like that in extracurricular activities. And don't pin me down to these figures because they change all the time, and I'm not very good with them anyway. But there's that. And then, of course, the Campfire Girls got sued. St. Vincent de Paul, their people got sued. And the idea and how you get involved in these nows is because of the fact that people do expect some money, and they do expect people to do things right. How do you get responsible? Where a volunteer is responsible for their actions, whether they're a volunteer or not. Just as an average John Doe citizen walking down the street, you're responsible for their actions. Now, it's kind of helpful being a volunteer if it's for a public agency, the state, federal government. They do put on some special limits. If you're a director, and that's where many in this room have been directors, you have two main duties. One is a duty of care, that you will sit in on meetings and make informed decisions. If you just loan your name to the organization so that so the name is on the letterhead and you don't go to meetings, frankly, what's that French phrase? You're a damn fool, because you've got liability. The other main duty of a director is loyalty. And loyalty is not to have a conflict of interest, not to be doing business and making extra money off of that organization, but doing things right. Now, lawyers, of which I'm one, we have a problem with this, because if we as a lawyer sit on the board of a charity, who is our client if we're giving any legal advice? Is there any confidentiality, the privilege between client and attorney, the confidentiality privilege? There's a couple of cases on that. It says it disappears. You don't have it. The Oregon Bar has recommended that lawyers do not serve on charity boards. Give them advice, but stay off of the board. I was reading last night the American Bar Association has now just appointed a new study committee to look at this. They say there's a heck of a problem. You want lawyers on the boards, but you don't want to give them an ethical problem as you go ahead and do this. So you do run into some things. Now, one of the worst things that can ever happen is that Murphy's Law takes effect. No matter how well prepared you are, no matter how many good rules you have, no matter how much paperwork you've got, Murphy's Law will take effect that when if anything can go wrong, it will. And then you remember O'Toole's commentary to that Murphy was an optimist. Well, if things go wrong, and they will, what do? You don't call the newspaper and say, we're not responsible, we didn't do it. That's not your first move. But you immediately investigate, take a look at it, and give help. And we have people here today who can tell you how to give help and what will happen. So at this time, Jill, who's had all kinds of experience with this, I'll just ask her, Jill, what happens when the catastrophe comes along? Do you think the agency should call the news media first chance?
Are these on? No, Bob, after reading your book, I am calling you. No, seriously, Bob has a book, and he was remiss in not plugging it. Would you hold it up? It's called Volunteers in the Law, and it not only tells you, I mean, it's a really very, very good book. Tells you all about volunteering, the types and why and everything, and then the second half is all of the things that either program managers, executive directors, or volunteers need to worry about. My part of the program is supposed to be talking about the importance of volunteering to the community, but after seeing all the hands and the people that I know in the room, and you all are extraordinary community volunteers, I really feel like I'm carrying coals to Newcastle, but I hope I can add a little something new to the discussion. I can't really think about the importance of volunteering without really talking a little bit about America and the unique place that volunteering occupies both in our national history and really our national psyche. Certainly one of the first people who made a direct link between the American character and the act of volunteering was Alexis de Tocqueville. And I'm sure you all have by your bedside his 1830 book, Democracy in America, where he really talked about this quaint little thing that Americans did. They all just kind of get together and they solve problems within the community. And he noted that over and over. And so it was sort of this frontier experience that really molded and kind of continually reinforced kind of the need for as well as the benefits of volunteerism. And then the two world wars came along and kind of reinforced the form, the content, that this rather unique inclination that we as Americans have to kind of get together to work on our problems. I'm a child of the 50s, and I remember it's in the 50s, really volunteering had almost become canonized as one of the defining characteristics of our country and of Americans. I think the 60s and 70s, we saw that explosion of causes and interest groups that really benefited from this unique skill that we had for organizing volunteers to further a cause or to meet community needs. Really, from the vantage point of the 1990s, I'm sort of tempted to say that we've so perfected the art of cause-related volunteering that we've really kind of caused gridlock. I mean, for every cause that has its volunteer corps over here, we have an equally well-organized, effective volunteer corps over here. And, you know, sometimes I think in the waning years of the 20th century, one really has to wonder if we're ever again going to be able to really reach a consensus around community needs, values, and around solutions. I would also posit that volunteerism has really become a metaphor for our sense of community, and maybe it's even more precisely a metaphor for our longing for the sense of community that we've either lost or we feel that we have lost. Let me illustrate. One of the things I think de Tocqueville saw was barn raisings, and you know, you think about that, and it's all the neighbors coming together and helping, doing what one family can't do, the community could do, and then they would use that opportunity to socialize and literally build a sense of community among widely dispersed neighbors. I think the best recent example of this connection between volunteering and our sense of community was the Oregon flood of 1996. What happened down at the seawall? What happened when the water started rushing into Lake Oswego? Why were there traffic jams in Vernonia? It was because there were hundreds, if not thousands of people all coming together to help one another. They were coming together to help their neighbors, also to help perfect strangers. And how often did you hear in the media the microphone in the face of someone drenched with rain, but they're saying, gee, it feels so wonderful to help. It really just feels so wonderful when we're all working feverishly for the same cause. To take a little license with Dickens, when I think about the flood of '96, which was obviously one of the most trying times for the Red Cross, you could say that the Great Flood was the worst of times, but in some way, for that sense of community, it really was some of the best of times and brought out the best that we have seen in people. Now, this historical and metaphorical importance of volunteerism, there is something new going on, and there is a new debate that's surfacing, and what that is doing is thrusting volunteerism and voluntary organizations to center stage. That debate is over the respective roles of the private, the public, and the volunteer sector in solving our nation's problems. The debate has come about because of a variety of political, economic, and social realities. We appear to really be on the edge of embracing a new philosophy of personal and community responsibility for problem solving. This philosophy, I believe, really grows out of the real or the perceived failure of some of the social policies of the last decade of the New Deal and the Great Society, which put a lot of responsibility for social solutions on government. The new reality is that governments can't afford to solve all our problems. And furthermore, I think we as a people have really reached somewhat of a consensus that we're no longer confident that governments are capable of finding, let alone funding, the solutions. I think this governmental devolution, devolution, whatever you want to call it, this pushing of responsibility down, lower and lower, it's really here to stay. I think we're all going to have to adjust to it. The federal government is going to be asking states and communities to take much more responsibility for themselves. Communities, in turn, are going to be asking citizens to solve many of their own problems. Increasingly, politicians, civic leaders, and of course many demagogues are citing the voluntary sector as one of the answers to this need to solve community problems. The most thoughtful people in this debate are calling for a debate and for an eventual consensus on what should the voluntary sector do. What should we be responsible for? And once we decide that, how are we going to fund that? How are we going to make sure that we nurture and that we fund the voluntary sector so it can meet these new challenges? In order for voluntary organizations and voluntary programs to take on this increased responsibility, my message really is that the community has to take a responsibility for creating an environment in which they can flourish. We must create what Greg Chalet and Sally McCracken from the Oregon Community Foundation are talking about, creating a culture of giving in Oregon. Sally's been very involved in a study called Giving in Oregon, and what they are finding that our giving levels are not as high as in other parts of the country. So we must create this culture of giving in order to ensure that the voluntary sector is going to have the resources to meet this new challenge. And if there's one point I'd like you to take away today, it's that you must not make the common mistake of assuming that volunteer programs are free. Yes, they can be extremely cost-effective by giving more output for dollars spent, but they are not free. Read my lips. During the flood of '96, over a period of 2 months, Red Cross fielded 1,776 relief workers. They were from Oregon and around the nation. They filled professional jobs such as caseworker, mass care shelter manager, casework supervisor, staffing officer. 93% of that staff was volunteer. Pretty good ratio, 12 to 1. Last night, 15 trained Red Crossers were on the scene of the tragic fire in Aloha. 14 were volunteers. Now, Red Cross is able to do this because we have in place a recruiting, training, tracking, and career development system for volunteers that is unmatched on the planet. However, we also have a paid staff infrastructure dedicated to the support of this volunteer corps. Without this infrastructure, we couldn't do what we do, nor can other voluntary organizations. If we are going to be asking the voluntary sector to pick up a lot of the slack that currently is coming down the line, then we must dedicate ourselves to seeing that there is this culture of giving in Oregon, and it's both of time and of money. On the other side of the equation, the challenge to leaders like myself, as organizations of the Red Cross which rely on volunteers, we must recruit the volunteers who are willing to put forth the specific effort that our organization needs, and for them to do it without tangible reward. We need to train the volunteers, and then we need to provide the leadership that will make that experience so personally satisfying that individual will continue to seek that experience. Now, that's a really tall order. Well, let me read to you a quote from a letter I received from a Red Cross volunteer from California who served as a casework on the Oregon flood relief operation. It was her first operation. She worked up in Vernonia, Mist, and Jewel in Columbia County. I quote, "Flying home after the disaster, I feel sad. I feel the need for a day or two of reflection before seeing my family and returning to my normal routine. As we make our final approach to the runway, I have tears in my eyes. I know in my heart the next time the phone rings and Gonzalo Hernandez asks if I can go on another assignment, I will say yes." Then she goes on to say, "Thank you, Red Cross. Thank you for letting me have this experience." Now imagine this woman saying, "Thank you, Red Cross, for letting me do this work. Thank you for letting me live for 21 days in extremely difficult circumstances." She lived in a camp up by Vernonia. thank you for subjecting me to incredible emotional stress, because she worked one-on-one with people who'd lost everything. And then thank you for letting me work 14 hours a day. I mean, when's the last time you got a letter from an employee said, thank you for letting me work long hours under bad conditions for no pay? I mean, I think they put people in jail for that, don't they? Don't they, Bob? Well, in closing, I would just like to say, you know, folks, the Red Cross is really on to something here. What we're able to do, and other voluntary organizations are able to do, is tap into and organize what Margaret Mead called that extraordinary impulse that human beings have to make things better. Now, we tap into that impulse, and then we focus it on the social and human problems caused by disasters. And then we enable volunteers to make things better. This is the essence of the voluntary sector's work. As a community, we desperately need a very healthy voluntary sector, but it's not just to make things better. I would put forward that we also need it in order to afford each and every one of us the opportunity that this Red Cross worker had to actively engage in making things better. Thanks.
This can be a lot of fun following Jill. Gosh, I'm supposed to be the person that creates passion, but she's already done it, so I have to somehow try to maintain it. One thing I'd like to say, though, I'm frustrated because I realize when everybody raised their hand that you're already sold on the idea of volunteerism, and I love to sell, and in my business, if we don't sell, we don't make a profit. So I was kind of frustrated. I don't know what to say, but I've noticed that this book is for sale, but not at Powell's. It's at Norm Thompson. It's $14.95, and it's at the door. Couldn't resist, Bob. I'm sorry. One thing I'd like to do, I like to think in terms more of personal. I mean, even though I run a business and we have a number of employees and you worry about budgets and all that, but I like to focus my attention and now on the personal, just on a one-on-one. And I've thought a lot about how I try to conduct my life, and it wasn't my idea, it was somebody else's idea. And I've been trying it very hard for the last 5 years to really model this. And I view my life as a three-legged stool. And as you know, a three-legged stool needs a fair amount of balance, so you better have each leg just about perfect. The first leg is my career, and it's obvious we all have careers, and we spend the majority of our lives trying to develop ourselves in our career and hopefully be successful. And these three parts are really equal for me. The second is personal development, and it has to do with family and my health and exercise and recreation and spiritual or whatever it is, but it's just trying to develop myself as a better person, and I think we all do that. And I like to think that that's roughly a third of the time is spent. But the final third, the final leg, which is to me is equal, is service to the community. And I think if we believe that we're one community, and that if we are, we're part of this, and it only works if all of us care about the community, and we give the proper amount of time, talent, or resources, financial resources, then this community will be successful. So what I did, actually it wasn't my idea, but I'll take credit because there's nobody from Norm Thompson that's going to stand up here. There's somebody out there, but they're going to stand up and take credit for it. But about a year ago, we decided that with United Way and EFO, we were doing our campaign, and we decided to let's get off the dollars, let's try to raise the dollars, but let's focus on volunteerism. So we came up with this model program, and our financial VP wasn't so sure when he came in. We said, this is how much it might cost. We didn't know how much it would cost, but the idea was that we would, if an employee would donate or volunteer 8 hours in their time, this would be non-company time, with a list of agencies that we approved, then we would turn around and give them 8 hours that we would pay, and they would go back out and volunteer again, and that would be our nickel. And the whole idea was to try to encourage volunteerism. The response was excellent, and we said it was a model because we were afraid that if this thing took off, we wouldn't be able to control it. But the long-term goal, and we're not there yet, is to be able to reach a point where we give a day a month, and that's roughly 5% of an employee's time. And if we're creative, if the employees are creative and the company's creative, we can carve that time out without having to have somebody come in and fill that position for that day. So there's no additional cost. But the employee goes out and the employee has the opportunity to be involved in the community. And we're not trying to be rigid as far as the agencies that we're involved in, but we had to start it carefully in the beginning to make sure that this thing didn't get out of control. But the response has been excellent. The one thing, though, that I didn't realize, and just today when we were talking, that most of our employees volunteer anyway. I mean, they do, and the benefit that I didn't realize was going to happen was that they were able to say that, and we were able to talk about that, and we were able to say this is a value that this company cares about, and all of a sudden it was matching what the employees care about. So that's turned out to be a real benefit. There's no question there's a benefit to the community and to the agency. I mean, that's fairly obvious, but what I found is there's a tremendous psychic dividend that comes from volunteering. And I try very hard, and I try to tell people to find your passion, find the agency that can create passion for you, and you won't pay any attention to the amount of time and effort you put into it. And all you'll do is feel good about yourself. You'll feel that you're a better person. This is where I'm preaching to the choir, but I have to say that because that's basically what we wanted to do at Norm Thompson. And the final part of that, the final benefit, which is something that I really, really believe strongly in, and that has to do with hope. You know, we can look and we can sit and talk about all the things that are wrong and how we're ever going to solve these problems, but if we focus on hope, if we give hope, and by volunteering, I've noticed that if you look in the eyes of the person receiving it, that you're basically saying you're okay and I'm here to help you, and it's going to work. Or it's an agency that's floundering, and they're wondering if financially they can make it, and you step up and you help them, or you write that check. And I really believe that each one of those, it's a dividend. That's, in this case, it's hope that's actually the dividend. And I have to say, being a business person, that we always worry about the bottom line. And I think the bottom line, when I think of volunteering or volunteerism, I view that as an investment, and it's either a financial investment or it's an investment of your time. And those dividends that I just mentioned is what comes back to us. And I believe that the dividend far exceeds the investment. I think it's a wonderful investment. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for volunteering their time and expertise to be with us today and to share. Oh, yes. Okay. I believe our panelists are going to speak among themselves first, and then I'll ask a question. So please, talk amongst yourselves.
Well, Bob, how was your day so far? And Jill, was that a nice party last night? I enjoyed myself.
Great. Yeah, you're looking quite well today, John.
Thank you.
Well, I actually have a question for Bob. When we talk about the legal ramifications of volunteer programs, both there are ramifications for people who volunteer, but then for the agency. But I find that in my organization, I have a responsibility when I'm starting a new program, taking on a new program, or even doing a large event that it's my obligation, and I want to call risk management at national headquarters to tell them about it. But I consistently, frankly, if I always took their advice, I'd never do anything. That we're getting to be so worried about, and we should be, of the legal ramifications. But so for other executive directors in the audience, I mean, when we get this advice from the risk management people saying, oh no, they have to sign this, or if you've got this clause, and you feel somewhat paralyzed, how should we take the advice that lawyers give?
Well, having started out my life as an insurance adjuster and then becoming an insurance defense lawyer, I would say disregard 95% of the advice of the risk manager. You know, lawyers are trained to be cautious, and you know, we usually give advice, don't do this, you won't get in trouble. That's crazy. People have got to have the guts to stand up and do things. And Oregon has passed a special law that if something goes wrong in your organization, some volunteer does something wrong, you can go out, and you should go out and give immediate help right now. I mean, they need a medical attention, a counselor, whatever they need. And then some lawyers say, oh, don't do that, don't do that. That'll be admission of liability. We have a law in Oregon that says that's not an admission of liability. You can go out and help, and that's perfectly okay, and it won't be used against you. I'd go a step further. Even if we didn't have the law, I'd say go out and help anyway. I think it's your moral duty, and I think if you ever got in front of a jury as to whether you did something wrong, would you rather be there as the person who went out and helped them right away, or would you rather be like Exxon Oil and the Whitehead case in Washington County and some of these others? Would you rather be the one that said, it's not me, I didn't do it, I didn't do it? I'd rather go in there as the good guy, not the bad guy. John, what happens when you have a problem like that?
Well, I know what I'm going to do now. Actually, I don't know. I would call my attorney, and I know that he'd give me the. I'm going to call you from now on, though. I can.
Yeah, they're better odds. It's 95%.
You know, I really do think that. I really agree with what you're saying. That we just have to. If we sit there and keep questioning what we're doing, we'll just never get anywhere. And you know, I agree. I completely agree. I'm not a legal person, obviously, but I know that's how I act. And I just go ahead and do it, and then I maybe hide for a while to see if anything's going to happen, and then reemerge.
I'd give a caveat to that, however. If you are a director, director and officers insurance, D&O insurance, is something that every agency should have. Not just because you might do something wrong, but there's a tendency today for people to sue a director, and a defense from the standpoint of a lawyer fee, you can easily look at $50,000, $75,000, and this D&O insurance will take care of that for you. So it's not that expensive, run somewhere $1,000 on up, depending on the size of the agency. If I were serving as a director, I would like to have that D&O insurance in place so that it could give me a defense cost if necessary. Jill?
Well, and just to comment on that, and when I talked about that we have a responsibility to the voluntary sector, and I think particularly to small community-based organizations, that costs money. And so when your favorite small charity is asking for a donation and you're saying, oh, I don't want it to go to overhead, I'd like it to go just to programs. Hey, folks, there has to be an infrastructure, and there needs to be the kinds of things that Bob points out in his book. And so if your donation happened to buy some of this insurance, then, I mean, that's allowing the agency to function and do the work that the agency should do.
You know, the state legislature has taken a look at this, and they're trying to be helpful. No longer is a director liable for ordinary negligence. They're only liable for gross negligence. Now, we used to, when I was in law school, it was kind of simple. We'd say you take two simple negligences and you add them up and you have gross negligence. Then the Supreme Court came along and said, no, you can't do that. So right today, if you ask me as a lawyer, what is gross negligence in the state of Oregon, I can't tell you what it is. I don't know. The other thing the legislature's done is they say that you can ask for indemnification from the agency that you're working for. You can ask them to pay your expenses or fees. Now, I don't know too many agencies that budget $50,000, $100,000, $500,000 for legal fees, so I wouldn't depend too much on the indemnification clause. So, John, you still have a problem there.
Great.
I have just one comment. John Emrick is a very modest man, and I think when Greg Chalet and Sally McCracken and other people talk about creating a culture of giving in Oregon, that, you know, I think John Emrick is exactly what they had in mind. And it's also when people talk about we need good corporate citizens, and to me, one of the definitions of good corporate citizen is someone like John who will recognize the efforts and reward the efforts and motivate their this extraordinary impulse that their employees have to make things better by you know, either matching donations or giving time off. So you're a wonderful role model for the community.
Thank you.
I want to ask John,
Quit
I
picking
have
on me,
heard,
Bob.
well, Jill's more friendly than you are. I've heard, John, that you're on 16 different boards. Is that true or not? And how do you juggle or take care of those?
No, I'm involved on 16, not officially on the boards, but I've decided that my talent is I'm kind of a quick start and then I fizzle out. And if I can go into an organization and help them, and usually about the first 2 hours of my ideas are maybe pretty good, and then they go downhill from there. So I can pop in and give them a jump start and move on. But no, actually, I'm on 16 advisory boards, and which includes some full boards. But I try very hard to understand what my talent is and what my talent is not. And there's a lot of is not. And if I can focus on the talent and give that, it's fun to do it. It makes you, it's wonderful feeling of worth. But also it comes easier, and I can focus my time. So I really try hard to do that. As a result, I feel like I can touch more organizations.
Jill, one of the things that's come up lately is many of the judges are asking some of the people convicted of a crime or misdemeanor to serve some time in public service, 100 hours, community service, something. Have you had any of those type of people, and what's your experience with them?
Yeah. Yes, we've worked with court referral programs, and we've had very, very good experience. Again, it's a matter of that we have a volunteer personnel office that functions as like a normal personnel office would be, and that is able to screen people and giving them the right job that someone who is on probation for embezzlement, we try not to put in the accounting department. That they're common sense things that you do, but frankly, we have gotten some extremely dedicated individuals and individuals who have kind of found some new meaning. And another program that we have is we are working a lot with organizations that give services to developmentally disabled individuals, and we structure programs for them to actually work at Red Cross and to give them experience. They now wash our vehicles. They do a lot of packing of kits for our first aid classes. And they really, as a group, are becoming very integrated into our organization, and we don't have a room for them to work in, so they work out in the cafeteria, and it's been an extremely rewarding experience. But you've got to have the personnel that can manage that can screen the people, and that can give oversight and guidance to, again, and that's an infrastructure issue.
John, I want to pick on you again. It's fun to do it.
So who's going to pick on you, Bob?
Nobody. I talk up first.
Yeah.
Father Greeley is a sociologist, Catholic priest who writes some, shall we say, steamy novels. People wonder, where he got all the information to do that. But he has made the statement that if you're a student in one of these schools like Jesuit, Catlin Gable, Episcopal, in one of these schools where you have to have a certain number of volunteer hours for graduation, he says that's destroying volunteerism, and that's not being a volunteer. What would be your answer to that?
Well, it's really timely. I was over at Central Catholic yesterday at lunch, and they were talking about their program. And it's 80 hours, it's 20 hours a year of volunteering for each class each year that they're in school. And I suggested to them that they take the final year and don't make it mandatory. Hopefully, if they've done a good job along the way, they're just saying, now it's up to you. And they liked that idea. They felt that I said, do you have confidence that the seniors would do it? And they said yes, they really did. So I think that, I think it's really careful. You have to be careful between duty and, what I say, duty and passion. I'd rather be involved in passion than duty. And if we think in terms of duty, it becomes kind of drudging, and you kind of take your eye off the focus of what it's really all about. But I really applaud that secondary schools are trying very hard to instill volunteerism at an early age. Because I believe that when you finally reach it, when you finally have that aha experience in a volunteer situation, that you can't get rid of it. You'll have it the rest of your life. And if you can reach it at 13, 14, 15, that's an awful lot of horsepower that's going to be in this community over a number of years. So I'm really in favor.
And that's one of the partnerships that where voluntary organizations can work with the schools, and it then becomes the responsibility of the voluntary organizations to make that experience for them, interesting enough to provide the passion and the skills that we have then instilled in these young people, this culture of giving, and it's the giving of time, and that it is worthwhile. So we also have a responsibility in structuring volunteer jobs to make them very interesting, and people can have a sense of passion about them.
Jill, I have a question of you. I guess we don't want to talk to Bob. I guess we just want to receive these. the state is growing, Portland's growing, the state is growing rapidly, and I notice that people that are asked to volunteer or asked to give, it seems to be it's sort of the same group to some degree, and a lot of times it's people that have been here a long time that you would know. And I'd like to try to figure out how we really capture, there's some wonderful people coming into the state, and how can we capture them? How can we get them involved in the community? And what do you do to try to accomplish that?
Well, it's really kind of funny because it's not in capturing them for their time as volunteers, but also for their money. And I've suggested to my development director, we're all asking the same people for money all the time, and it's the same list. And so we've decided that we're going to start chasing these BMWs and Lexuses around town, because there are a lot of people that you know, are maybe not on this one list, but they have resources, obviously. So we thought about, you know, following them home and getting their address and everything. But
you can just call Don Rasmussen.
Right. Well, I mean, we really do need innovative techniques. But it's interesting because as we are nominating committee met this year, of course, John Emrick's name comes up every year, and many names come up every year, and you realize these same people are on 16 different boards, and that's why we're having a philosophy of when you're going into corporations that there are so many talented people at you know, the mid-level rank or you know, not the head person, but people who are maybe new to the corporation and have incredible skills, and that these are also going to be the future leaders. And in terms of creating that culture of giving in Oregon, I think which started the whole debate at the Community Foundation was seeing that we have a whole echelon of leaders in the community who have been that top group giving, and that they, when they are gone, who's going to replace that group? And so I think it's incumbent upon us to begin recruiting again, you know, other people to fill their place.
You know,
but John, next year.
You can turn off some people by the repeated requests and money, service, time.
Thanks, Bob.
It kind of reminds me of the story, you know, that I get back to this deathbed again. There's a fellow on his deathbed, and the minister came in and he said a prayer or two, and then he said, do you renounce the devil and all his works? And the dying gentleman thought for a minute. He said, this is a very bad time to be making any new enemies. I thought of John, you know, when I said John, do you find people responsible that you work with as volunteers? Do you find the passion there in other people besides yourself?
You know, it's interesting. Across the different organizations I've been involved in, some are real easy to get passionate, to become passionate about, and I noticed the difference in the effort from the volunteers. And some are really tough. I mean, and it's not that it isn't a great cause, but I find that, and I noticed that some, it's, you know, it's kind of more the business, and they're providing. 2 minutes, okay. But I think there's a wide range of passion from one organization to the other, and it has nothing to do with the organization. I mean, as far as the value of the organization, but I find the ones that have the potential for high passion, the volunteers just don't want to leave. They'll just give whatever time is needed, and they tend to do quite well.
I'd like to emphasize that people should not be afraid of being a volunteer. If you just use plain old common sense, that's the key thing that'll take you through these various situations. And no lawyer can ever say you're not going to get sued or somebody's not going to make a claim. We have some other new laws, like if somebody files a frivolous lawsuit against you, they have to pay your attorney fee and your cost. But don't be too cautious, don't be too afraid. Work with an organization that knows what they're doing, and they have professional staff like Jill. I'm sure Jill will tell you they have meetings of their group, and they try to inform people where they are and where they're going and what they're doing. So don't be afraid. I mean, I know this group is all volunteered, but the radio audience here, probably some may be afraid to start out, but they shouldn't be. This is a good thing to do.
I'm Greg Jackson, chair of the program committee, and Louise Tippins, is it okay to ask the first question now? Thank you, Louise. Thanks again to our panelists. Portland is very fortunate to have among one of its temporary residents right now, Matt Biondi, who was that fantastic swimmer that won all those gold medals several years ago at the Olympics. And currently, Matt is volunteering his time to be the spokesperson for the Volunteer Center's The Human Race, coming up on August 4th. He's a very busy guy, and I was fortunate to have a conversation with him a couple weeks ago, and I said, Matt, why do you volunteer your time so much? And he said, because I always get back more than I give. Yeah. At a time when so many people say they don't have time to volunteer, I'd like to go down the panel, and let's start with Jill, and ask each of you specifically, what is it that in your volunteer time that you get back more than you give, and what would your life be like if you didn't have that in it?
Well, it would be very not as interesting as it is, and that's why I was saying that it's not just that voluntary organizations make things better. One of the biggest things that they do is enable us to feel like we're making things better. And when I sit on the National Advisory Committee for the Red Cross for their disaster relief, I get a great feeling of accomplishment that out of that came certain changes in the programs and in what was done that made disaster relief better, that made our programs better. And so I think it all gets back to that. You know, Margaret Mead was a very brilliant person. It's that we all have that need to help make things better. And that's why, like the letter we get from volunteers, I'm always humbled when they're saying, thank you for giving me this experience, when we should be thanking them. But clearly we get as much out of it as they do.
To me, it's just part of life. I was raised that way, and I wouldn't know how to do it any differently. I was one of 11 children, and we had to help each other, or it was a big problem if we didn't. I did get tired of wearing my older brother's clothes, but that was just one of those things. But my folks did it. My friends did it. When I married my wife, she was already a volunteer. She was doing things. And it's just part of the fabric of life as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't get away from it if I wanted to. It's there. John?
What was the question? No, actually, I feel, as Bob, I've been involved, my family was involved all of my life, so I don't really know any different. I don't know what would have happened if I'd been in a different family or educated a different way. But to me, it's always just, you just see the need, and what I enjoy, the psychic return I get, when I'm volunteering directly with somebody that's really receiving the volunteer effort as opposed to maybe fundraising or development, I always like to just look in their eyes, and when they're saying thank you, you look in their eyes and they don't have to say thank you to you, you can just feel it. And I find that often I will say thank you back, and then there's a kind of a puzzlement that comes across their face, that they are not used to that. And yet it's true. It's not just a nice thing to say. I really am easily saying thank you back.
I'm Ray Polani, a City Club member, and would you believe a volunteer? I have a question. So far, I think we have been focusing on what I would call structured volunteerism, which is basically volunteering to an existing organization to obtain and support and aid an existing aim, an existing scope. But what about citizens' involvement? When citizens inform citizens, acting perhaps as watchdogs, so to speak, take action, how could we ensure that they are listened to, that they can make a change, and that they can make a difference, that they can make things better, as you mentioned? This is a frustration that has occurred.
Well, I'll take a stab there, Ray. I know what you've been working on for a number of years. Supposedly, history teaches us that we can learn from the past and avoid some of the mistakes of the past. And I think you just have to look to volunteers and what they've been able to do. And looking at our country, my God almighty, all kinds of good things have happened. And some people are worried right now that volunteers, the rate has dropped from 51% to 47% in this country. Well, that's compared to 19% in France and 12% in Germany. So we're not doing so bad. And even though you can't get those trucks and cars and trains straightened out, Ray, keep trying. I think you'll do it.
I don't know better.
Hello, I'm Veronica Megler, City Club member. I'm a fairly busy professional with very little time during the week and very little control of my time. I've tried to volunteer and have become very frustrated that I haven't connected with any volunteer programs designed to take account of that. The only times I've been able to volunteer is when I've been unemployed. Do you know of efforts that are being made to take that into account, to allow people to volunteer outside the traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or outside of taking vacation or time off?
Yes, and frankly, unless voluntary organizations begin taking this into account and start structuring volunteer activities to accommodate working people, we are going to be in very, very dire straits, because we are finding, I mean, more and more people are working, have jobs, and have to volunteer at either in the evening or on weekends. So within the voluntary sector, when you talk about volunteerism, this is a subject that comes up over and over again. I know at the Red Cross, we are trying to deal with this, and we have started where our training sessions, you know, we have them in the evening, we have them on weekends, because you can't always expect people to have an employer like John that will let them off for volunteer activities. But I sympathize with your plight, but I think it's encouraging that when the voluntary sector, when we all get together, that is a main topic of conversation, is how are we going to meet this challenge of structuring volunteer jobs so that people who are very, very busy can come and help us.
Bob, is it ever advisable for a volunteer who's taking perhaps a group of scouts camping to take out individual insurance to cover themselves in case of an accident?
I would say that would not be necessary, because usually you can look at 3 insurance policies that are already there. One, if somebody is driving a car, they normally have insurance to cover them. 2, the agency that you're going for, Boy Scouts, whoever it is, they will have a general liability policy. And many people will have a homeowner's or excess insurance policy over their auto policy. So normally a volunteer will usually find there are about 3 insurance policies covering them. So it's not that big a worry.
Oh, thank you. I'm a volunteer for the Parkinson's Society, and they've just notified me that Mark Hatfield has proposed a Parkinson's research and education proposal. It is before Congress now, but that unless people will contact their Congress people, it is not going to pass. So if you're interested, I do have all the information, and I'll be at the dais afterwards. Speaking of volunteerism.
Thank you.